everybody. We are back here on EdVideo's Open Circuit. My name is Scott McGovern. I'm the program director here at EdVideo, and this is Edie, my co-host and co-producer of EdVideo's Open Circuit, a live web show where we speak with artists every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is our 24th episode. We started about 5 or 6 weeks ago, just to try to do something fun while the world is in the state it's in. Try to still get artists' stories out there, show some work, and hopefully maybe inspire people to be creative as well. Hope everyone who's been tuning in has been enjoying the show. Today we have a really special guest. I'm very excited to find out more about her artwork. Her name's Fan-Ling Suen. She lives just outside of Guelph. She's an incredible artist, but she also runs a residency called Lore, and she works for the Guelph Arts Council here. So we have lots and lots to talk about today. Before we get going, though, and find Fan-Ling on our magic video phone, one thing we like to do when Edie's here is something that Edie calls Edie's Video Game Review. So, Edie, what game do you have to show us today?
It's called Dancing Line. And so you press the space to turn, and if you don't press it in time, you'll fall off and you need to restart. And you try to get to the end of the thing, and if you collect gems and crowns, you can get points. And I just figured it out today, and so it's really nice, like graphics, if that's what you call them. And then it's just really fun and hard, and I really like it. I played it once before. I think I have a really bad, like not really clear memory of playing it at my friend's house, and I like it.
Well, it's quite a beautiful interface here. I love those hanging clocks in the background. It gives me a little bit of vertigo, like I'm afraid of heights, sort of like I don't want to fall. Wow. Sorry, this game is called Dancing Line.
Yeah.
And it's on Poke.com, the website you like to play games on.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you rate this game out of, say, 5?
Well, probably like just almost 5.
Almost 5.
Almost 5.
So 4.75 maybe?
4.99.
4.99. That's very close to 5. Wow. Very awesome. Wow. Thanks so much for showing us. I might try that game later today if I have time. Wow. Well, that was Edie's video game review of the day. Thanks so much, Edie. Before we find Fan-Ling, one thing we always do is talk about any upcoming guests. I've only got one confirmed with a date, but I've been speaking with a lot of people about coming on the show, hoping that line up a few more confirmed dates soon. And also, I get it if people are not willing to come on, because it's a little bit of a risk. Speaking live on the internet, but it's also very fun.
Because then it's always recorded, and if you get it off of YouTube, people could still have it.
Well, it's always everything you say can and will be recorded forever, right? So, but I mean, it's also kind of fun too.
I like that they liked it.
Well, let's talk about the guests that we have coming up on this Tuesday, May 19th. Our guest will be Andrew Mcluhan. Andrew lives in Prince Edward County, Ontario, where he does a few things. He's a father, but he's also his main job is he has an upholstery business. But also, what we're going to focus on more is what he's doing with the legacy of his family. His grandfather was the famous media theorist from Canada, Marshall Mcluhan. His father was Eric Mcluhan, who worked closely with Marshall through most of his career. And Andrew has taken the reins to set up something called the Mcluhan Institute, TMI. And what Andrew's doing is preserving the history of his grandfather and his father's legacy. He's got thousands of artifacts in there in a barn, books and clothing and documents, and he's whenever he can get the chance, he goes in and pours through it and figures that out, and he sort of plays forensics with the legacy of his family to preserve it, but to reinterpret it as well for a new time. So I'm very excited to speak to Andrew about these projects and what he's learning, what he's figuring out, and also like what we can learn from this too in this era. So join us Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Andrew Mcluhan. Very excited for this one. All right, so let's see now if we can find one more thing before we go to Fan-Ling. We would like to show you something really special on the internet that just came out today.
Oh, yeah.
So, one thing, excuse me, is today I was not supposed to be here in Guelph, and Fan-Ling was not supposed to be where she is, just outside of Guelph. We were actually supposed to be in the amazing city of Athens, Greece.
I've been there.
Edie's been there before, and I've been there quite a few times because Ed Video participates in an incredible art fair that's there. It's an independent art fair called Platforms Project, and like everything else, of course, it's not happening this year. We're hoping to return next year with the same proposal, but my friend Artemis and her team has done an amazing job of setting up this online version of it for this year. I've seen a few examples of people trying to do online things, and this is a stunning example of how you can do something awesome. So this is the floor plan at the Athens School of Fine Art with all of the booths set up. You can see here, that is the entrance, and the first booth that people would have seen, and hopefully they will 1 year from now, is Ed Video's booth. And so you can click on there and see all this information and images about the work that was supposed to be there. There's Ed Video's page right here with Fan-Ling's work, and also Corey Stackel, who was on their show last week talking about his work. And you can go through. There's about 3 or 4 different Canadian booths. Here's my friend Mathieu's booth from Chicoutimi, Quebec. AKA Gallery from Saskatchewan is there, and you can go up to the top floor even, and here's Juji, who's Julie and Jefferson, who live not too far from Fan-Ling in Hillsburg. So very cool. It's almost like a video game, and the other part of it too is there's actually live events scheduled, talks and performances and panels and all sorts of things going on. They did a fantastic job of it's almost like a video game where you can choose what you want to see and click around and see different things. So congratulations to the team at Platforms, and we're really hoping to be back next year. It's such an excellent art fair. About 25,000 people at least come through, so it's a great showcase for the work that we bring. So yeah, check it out. It's at platformsproject.com. All right, let's see now, though, if we can find Fan-Ling on the Magic Video phone. I think she's waiting for us on Zoom today. And let's see. Where are you? You're on channel 2. So many buttons to press here. Okay, Fan-Ling, are you there? Can you see me and hear me? Oh, sorry, I have you on mute. Can you hear me? Oh, sorry, that was on my end. Sorry. Now you're there. How's it going? Oh my goodness. Okay.
Oh,
Now I got you. Sorry, it's so many
I'm
buttons and
muted.
sliders.
Ah!
All right. Nice to see you and hear you. Thanks so much, Fan-Ling. How's it going?
It's going good. Yeah, thanks for having me on your live show.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with me about your work. I mean, I've known you, I guess, a few years now, and for me, it's a great excuse just to learn more. I mean, even if not too many people watch, that is totally fine. But I love the experience to learn more about your work. Today, I really want to get into it and talk primarily about your artwork, but also about two other things: your lore residency that you run just outside of Guelph, and also your position. You've been working at Guelph Arts Council for about a year or two, and sort of what's going on there, and what you're planning, and things about that as well. Yeah. So before we get going, I always ask artists about their first of all, where are they and how are they doing?
So I'm at home right now. I live just outside of Guelph, as you mentioned, on a farm in Rockwood with several other of my pals who are also farmers and artists and hold off-farm jobs like myself. Staying healthy, ebbs and flows like everyone else. Spend my days kind of reading, cooking, cabin fever types of hijinks. Recently adopted a new acquaintance called the slow molasses of time. Uh, I welcome this guest with a cup of tea, but I'm really hoping this friendship doesn't flourish too much.
Maybe it's
um, yeah. At one point this past 2 months, our bathroom had turned into kind of a science art studio of sorts. My friend was growing a bag of oyster mushrooms in the shower, and our bathtub was being occupied by dogwood sticks that I'd harvested to soak in high hopes of making a basket. So during those couple of weeks when the bathroom turned into a strange studio, I was very thankful to myself that we're actually not allowed to have guests over. So that was good.
wow. You're staying busy, and that's excellent to be staying busy and taking, I guess, the opportunity to try some new things as well with what you got out there. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
place. I visited. I can't wait to find out a little more of it about it, though. But let's get going. First of all, I always also ask people, I guess, what are your kind of like early memories of art, or I guess what I'm always trying to figure out what nudged you into being a creative person or inspired you when you're younger.
Yeah. One of my first memories of art, I think it's quite typical. Like I went to a school trip to the AGO, I think about grade 3 or grade 4, and we had already spent a chunk of time kind of going through old paintings, and our class was walking in a line to get to another section of the gallery. Like I can't really remember the specifics, but I do remember as we were walking, I saw a huge hamburger at the corner of my eye and thinking like, whoa, what's that doing there? And I was like really taken aback by the contrast of the old paintings that we were just looking at. And as an adult looking back, it was Claes Oldenburg's floor burger. So as a kid, it's cool because I had no other exposure to art otherwise. I wasn't much of a drawer or painter growing up, but I liked building things. I was um, I was like a rogue construction worker. We moved when I was about 10 to a very new suburban development, and we were one of the first houses in this neighborhood. We had no neighbors yet, like no grasses, no fence, no pavement. So for the first 2 summers, we were surrounded by mounds of dirt, construction material, like empty lots and half finished homes. So I spent my summer days by myself scavenging material like plastic, wood, pipes, like whatever I can get my hands on, and literally haul these materials back to my parents' backyard to construct my own fort. Um, like I'm really surprised I never got in trouble for this, but I would classify that as my first taste into sculpture.
That's so funny. A funny story about the Klaus Oldenburg giant hamburger. Some other kind of local artists, the Fastworms. This is maybe a secret, but I'm going to reveal it here. They used to work, or at least Kim did, at the AGO in the 70s as security guards, and apparently they used to lounge on it at night when the AGO was closed.
That's what I wanted to do, is jump right on it. It's like so inviting. Anyways,
Well, there's a precedent for there, and I remember seeing it too as a child and being surprised how it was kind of in rough shape. And I think 10 years ago they restored it as well. So, yeah, it's too bad we never got that opportunity, but that's so funny. So yeah, like as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we are supposed to be in Athens right now. So it's a delight to still be able to speak with you today about your work and show some of the work we are actually going to bring there. The first piece it's too big to have brought, but when I saw it on your website, I really, really fell in love with it immediately. So did my wife, Jen. I find it's exactly the style of art I love. It's a sculpture from a few years ago. Let's take a look at some images of it. It's called The Brood. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got the idea to make this sculpture called The Brood?
Yeah. Well, so my background is not only in art, but also sociology. And like, I'm really interested in human relationships. And so sociology as its science kind of informs a lot of my research. So that's kind of one of the key pieces that ties this project together. And so I'm interested in how institutional structures inform how we engage with one another. And so between 2010 and 2014, I started to look at the institution as a family, as a concept, and the invention of childhood at the same time. So just investigating the relationship between child and parent. And so the brood is both intentionally supposed to evoke an animate, but also inanimate. And it was inspired by my budding interest at the time in the Victorian era, and also two stories. So namely, I don't know if you're familiar with Roald Dahl's kind of dark tale called The Landlady. And then also simultaneously inspired by David Cronenberg's sci-fi horror film from the, I think, 70s or early 80s called The Brood. Yeah, so anyways, The Landlady, as a synopsis, is kind of a creepy tale that is like this seemingly sweet elderly woman who operates a bed and breakfast, and halfway through the story you discover that she has a dark habit of kind of a ritual of preserving her house pets and also her house guests, kind of like a site of trauma for her. And then the David Cronenberg piece, I was really captivated by The Brood. And the film is about a woman named Nola, who participates in this alternative psychotherapy session in the 70s called Psychoplasmics. I don't think it's not a real thing, but so Psychoplasmic, these patients are encouraged to kind of let go of their suppressed emotions through like physiological changes in their body. Like, they're encouraged to do that. So this woman, Nola, is a very successful patient and really successful with her treatment, that she continually gives birth externally, like in her womb and in her body, to these dwarf-like children who are asexual, colorblind, and toothless. And they run this violent rampage murder around town. It's okay. So think of those two stories in the background. So then circling back to the theory and broader idea about The Brood is, I was also doing a lot of reading about the psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott, who talks a lot about transitional phenomena. So examples of transitional phenomena would be like blankets, teddy bears, stories, and dolls. So according to Winnicott, these objects are kind of a means for a child to relieve some kind of frustration or stave off anxiety when the mom is absent. So it allows the kid to kind of maintain, like a young kid, like a infant or a child, to maintain a continued kind of fantasized bond with his or her mother as she slowly separates herself for longer periods of time as the child ages into an older child. So this kind of illusion is preserved, like this constant connection between his or herself. So like this preservation kind of ties back to the taxonomy of the landlady, you know, like preserving this moment in time. So building on this theory of transitional objects, the brood is like this grouping of amorphous beings without head or limbs, because it's not really so important about what it is or who it is, but the fleshiness of it and the warmth of it. So these sculptures are made out of silicon, and they're soft sculptures. They're fleshy, they're hairy, there's some density and weight to it. There's like a soft layer of hair on the sculpture, and it's real human hair. And there's details of wrinkles and pores and sunspots, and they're meant to be like, if I were to install this in a gallery, they're meant for viewers to pick them up from the crib and to hold them around the gallery space. So yeah, those are kind of some touch points as to where that idea germinated from.
Wow, that's awesome. I just love it. It's so like creepy. It's sort of full of paradoxes with the different aesthetics between the little living bean-like characters and this Victorian crib. Also, really love the kind of detail of it with the two plugs into these ornate receptacles, very fleshy looking, and I don't know. It just seems full of like some amazing, like beautiful, but like body horror style metaphors. There's a lot to
Yeah,
a lot
the
to.
plug was like kind of recalling an umbilical cord. And what's so fascinating to me about the Victorian era is like they really describe the house as compared to a body. Like if you look at older homes, the kitchen, like right now homes, like the kitchen is the showcase. It's like the showstopper. You put that at the front, you walk into the home, boom, it's right there. But if you look at older homes, and I think there's a few older Victorian homes in Guelph, the kitchen is shuttled away in the back. Like it's really not meant to be seen. It's really like the bowels of the house. And that's how things are compartmentalized, right? The morning room is meant, you know, to write your agenda down. And if you're a wealthy person, that's where you would instruct your maid. Like every room has its purpose, and there's some comparisons between the body of the house and the body of the person. So I was just kind of playing between that kind of interplay there when you mentioned like the cord and stuff like that.
Well, it's super successful. I think it's. I'd love to see it in real life. Set up again. Let's talk about another sculpture piece that we were going to be seeing in real life today. We were going to bring it to Athens. It's called the Maiden. Smaller sculpture, but I mean, it's sort of a similar kind of atmosphere in a sense, or sort of this idea of nurturing or potential life, whatnot. I mean, so much of your work is coming out of, I'm going to get to this later, about sort of like folk tales and fairy tales and whatnot, and like expectations that are set up. What is sort of your idea that inspired you to create this other sculpture called the Maiden, which we'll take a look at some images of?
Yeah. So, you know, this work was made in 2012, and I do have like a whole description about the work itself, which does touch on fairy tales and this kind of Rapunzel idea of being suspended in a period of time where the heroine is often waiting for someone or something to come along to kind of activate it, right? Like you see this in tropes in Snow White and other stories, and so that's kind of where my mind frame was at the time. But I find when I look back at work kind of years later and re-interview like a sculpture or a piece, new things kind of emerge alongside the initial intention of the work itself. So one thing that came apparent to me a couple years later after finishing the piece is how a lot of my work during this time, so like the Maiden and the Brood, when I finished school, was around, I mean, it's plain as day, but it's around reproduction and fertility and having kids. And so at the time I was working at an art school for kids in Vancouver while maintaining my practice. So kids were undoubtedly at the forefront of my thinking and just like my psyche in general. And I remember like my female art colleagues at the time and myself all being around, in our mid 20s. We were very often engrossed in late night conversations on the topic of kind of pursuing one's art career versus the decision or deciding to have children earlier on, or trying to find examples around us whereby one has successfully done both. And for some reason or another, there seemed to be this urgency at the time that somehow the feeling of like a life-changing decision had to be made, rather than relaxing into the ebbs and flows of life and just how things unfurl in their own time. And it's not whether or not you choose to have children or not, or choose your career or not. But like, or choose to do both, but it's the decision itself. Yeah. So not so much the decision itself, but the potency and the power of choice. So I can't remember if you mentioned it, but there's like a ritualistic aspect to this sculpture where a suggestion that, one could climb up these stairs and sit there and then climb back down and do it again and kind of climb back down. So there's this aspect of performative choice to a degree that is in there that I didn't really come forward to me at the time. So, yeah.
A lot of your work, I think it's amazing, your sculpture work, because there's sort of like this little, it's like a narrative built into it. Whereas, I mean, I think the viewer can sort of position themselves in it, like, and imagine, as an example, in the Maiden, like sitting in that chair, at a different scale. I mean, how are you thinking about that idea of it? Like, you're setting up a scenario, I think that's very easy for the viewer to let their imagination into. But I mean, how does that maybe? That's a weird question, but how does that kind of relate to the idea of the narrative of fairy tales or like metaphors that are coming through in your work?
Like metaphors in relation to the sculpture, or?
Yeah, I mean, in this one, for example, like I guess I thought about like Rapunzel, but it's sort of like Rapunzel with autonomy. I think like she's not trapped up there. She has her own ladder,
I mean, it depends. I guess it can go both ways. Like, it could be a false sense of autonomy because the ritual is the same. Like, the viewer is suspended in a very breadcrumb way of a specific set of actions that you can or can't do. Like, the ladder is very suggestive that you are invited to come up and go down. But in those kinds of stories, it plays out that transitional moment and it holds it in suspension. And that's the story that continues to play out. Like, there's nothing neither really before or nothing really after that. And it kind of encapsulates that time. And I think I'm quite fascinated by that.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about another one of your projects that, in a similar way, like, but the viewer doesn't actually have to imagine it. The viewer can actually participate and sit on it. This one I think is very funny, but I don't know much about it. We've never spoken about it before. It's called the Teeter Slaughter. Amazing name for a sculpture, the Teeter Slaughter. Can you just first of all just like kind of describe what this is while we're taking a look at it? I just love the form and the idea, and I just want to know more about like kind of the mechanics of it as well while we take a look.
Yeah, so it is what its namesake is. It's half teeter-totter, half kind of guillotine, but there's no slaughter aspect really to it in the way that there's no kind of blade. But the sculpture itself is quite large and to scale of a real life kind of French Revolution guillotine. So it stands at 14 feet tall. So when you encounter the piece, it takes quite a physical or almost authoritative presence in the space. Yeah, I remember kind of observing viewers engaging with the piece and always first with hesitation. I noticed especially with art sculptures where people are invited to interact with the pieces, it always begins with such a gentle approach. But I find after a couple of minutes or so, people get more comfortable, and there's quite a bit of gusto there. And I don't know, who knows? Maybe it's because people are often not allowed to touch the artwork. But I remember during the opening, hoping the handle wouldn't fall off. But so yeah, so the mechanics of it, it operates on a counterweight system. So there is a cement block on the back end of the sculpture that's 300 pounds. So it allows the viewer to kind of, the same feeling as a teeter-totter, where we have a partner. You're kind of floating up and down. I don't know if you can see in the pictures there, but you'll notice that the seat can be moved forward or backward. There's a set of gears. So the viewer can adjust accordingly to their weight, so that the counterweight can operate effectively based on the person's body mass. So the components, like the material components, it's oak wood, metal, and steel. Yeah, it's kind of like, if we want to get into the metaphor of it, similar to my other works, I do turn to history and sociology again to inform this. And again, I was looking at institutional structures that kind of shape and affect our relationship with one another. So looking at both components, the teeter-totter, Teeter Slaughter, the hybrid between teeter-totter and a guillotine. So when you think about a guillotine, in the place of where the teeter-totter would typically be the bascule, which is the plank where the condemned is strapped onto. And they're seemingly very different objects, right? Like the guillotine is an instrument of death, signaling the end of one's life, and the teeter-totter is an equipment for play, signaling the beginning of one's life. So although they seem quite different, they are in fact quite similar. So both the guillotine and the playground equipment use the similar kinds of industrial materials, and they also emerged around the same time. So, I mean, guillotines originally, like the first instance of it is in the 1400s, but the example of the 14-foot guillotine, which was quite revolutionary at the time, the 14-foot style emerged around late 1700s, and it was used for the purpose of the French Revolution. So constructed out of oak and steel. And then 30 years later, the first playgrounds in America were also made out of iron, steel, and wood. So both are, strong, sturdy, immobile, made to weather outdoor, high traffic usage. So they share that in common, and they also share similar basic, geometric shapes. The two 14-foot perpendicular uprights, separated by a horizontal beam. The guillotine takes the shape of a rectangle. Also taking the shape of the rectangle is the plank where the body rests, and then there's like a circle that kind of grips the neck. And then the blade severing the head is this this weird kind of triangle. On the playground, we have similar kinds of geometric shapes that play out. We have the merry-go-round that goes around in a circle. We swing from a rectangle. The seesaw, we slide down a rectangle. There's some parallels there. So when looking at them, these geometric shapes, they not only shape and reshape us in a physical sense, but also in a quite literal sense, right? Like the guillotine severs heads, and the playground promotes physical fitness. And they also kind of dictate how we come to interact with one another. So at the time, the guillotine's design was celebrated because it kind of ended this gruesome dual and mental dilemma between the executioner and the victim. Because in older forms of execution and torture, like the executioner had to really get in there and have some kind of physical contact with who they're condemning, like either through the wheel or the axe. And so there wasn't this separation that the guillotine kind of provided. This like strange kind of efficacy that emerged out of that. So no longer having to have direct interaction with the victim, and so there's no human agency, which is a huge kind of key thing about this contraption. And the playground equipment also dictates how we interact with each other through rules of play. So, like, promotes turn taking when we go down the slide, partnership and cooperative play on the seesaw, and then also exclusion when one doesn't abide by these rules. So, for this work, I was really interested in looking into institutional structures such as the penal system or the educational system, and how they shape how we act, and then in turn how we relate to other people.
Wow, that's a fascinating take on it. I'm really seeing actually how your background from your undergrad in sociology is playing into your ideas here. It's an amazing amount of research and insight about how these things function as sculptures, but within those sculptures, like the expectations, the metaphor, the connotations of these forms as well. Very, very amazing, actually. Let's move on. We saw a little glimpse this at the onset of the show with some examples from Platforms Project's online portal for the fair that we're supposed to be at in Greece. But really also love some of your 2D work, and I saw these pieces, I think, at the Capacity 3 gallery when you had a show there. We'll take a look at the series Bluebeard's Children. Can you use some of your sociology background to describe for you what's going on in the concept of these 3 works, Fan-Ling?
Sure, it's inevitable. Yeah, so I don't know if you could see there, but they're in one of the prints or the drawings, the theme of the brood emerges again. Like, there's a brood of children wrapped around a coil of snakes. So this work kind of came around the same time. And for this work, I was really drawing on historical and contemporary versions of Bluebeard folktale, like, and how narrative perspectives change and shift over time. I'm really fascinated by how stories mutate, just through conversations, just through how things are recorded, how we absorb them into our everyday life and then retell them. So while I was making these prints, the 2 texts that I was reading at the time were Charles Perrault's Bluebeard, which is published in France around the late 1600s, and then Margaret Atwood's version of Bluebeard's Egg around the 1980s. Are you familiar with a Bluebeard, the story itself?
Oddly, I am, because when I was living in Paris, where the guillotine's from, we didn't have any English books, and Edie was 4 years old, and we'd like to read to her. And I found a store, and they had a folktale, a fairy tale book anthology, and so we'd read these. And one night, I didn't know the story of Bluebeard, and I started reading it to Edie. Normally, I don't really censor too much when it comes to that, but I kind of had to bail on the story about halfway through as she unlocked the room. Got a few sentences into that and just had to shut it down there. Yeah, so I am.
Person, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so like there's this weirdo rich aristocrat who has so many wives that disappeared, and lo and behold, another woman agrees to marry him. And he almost, I feel like, tricks her, because it's like, here are the keys to my castle. I'm going to go on a business trip, but don't open any doors, especially not this one. Of course she's going to open it, right? So, yeah, there's like she finds all the dead wives, as you had read silently in your head. So, yeah, quite fascinated by that story. And then, are you familiar with Margaret Atwood's version of it?
No, I didn't even know that existed until you mentioned it right now.
Yeah, so she does a great kind of series of short stories, and I find her books in her younger years, a lot of them have to do with interpersonal relationships of many different kinds. So this one, Bluebeard's Egg, is a modern take, I think, on Bluebeard. So it's about this woman named Sally, and she's kind of like an insecure wife who is married to Ed, who is this like handsome heart surgeon. And Sally is kind of Ed's third wife. So similar to original Bluebeard's tale, Sally knows nothing about the previous wives or their reason for departure, but the presence of the ex-wives and the stepchildren are always present in the background of their house. Either that's through childhood toys left behind or just her own thoughts in the story. She's always pondering about who are the ex-wives. So that really informs who she is in the story. And so throughout the story, her sense of self-worth is contingent on Ed pretty much. Like she orbits her thoughts, actions, and internal dialogue all around her husband. She even goes as far as taking a night course on the belief that this would make her more interesting to Ed. So she takes this night course called Forms of Narrative Fiction, whereby the class is studying the story of Bluebeard. And throughout the story, you know, Sally continually masks her insecurity, you know, making light of suspicion about his infidelity and whatnot. So I don't know. Anyway, so other versions of Bluebeard, including this one, is like, you know, Bluebeard murdered his wives only after he finds out they are pregnant. There's some, you know, ones where the wife survives, and there's one where he doesn't. But in both of these stories, like Margaret Atwood and Charles Perrault, I'm really fascinated by the power dynamics that happen within sexual relationships and the marital institution, and like the themes of betrayal of trust. And the other themes that come through is kind of the multiplicity of wives in each story. So like a symbol and reminder that enforces the idea that the women in the stories will be punished for her curiosity. You know, in Perrault's version, the wives were, you know, physically punished as they were murdered for their curiosity. And in Atwood's tale, Sally is almost psychologically punishing herself. So yeah, so I was interested in the mutation of story and how this occurs over time. So in these prints, I created Bluebeard's children. And not in both stories, like Bluebeard doesn't have any children, but I wanted to bring forward what loomed in the background in all these versions was the absence of children. So this was kind of my take on a classic tale.
Well, thanks so much for explaining. That was my next question is about, you know, in the traditional story, Bluebeard doesn't have children, so I was very curious about, you know, who are these theoretical children and whatnot. Again, another series of drawings that we were going to hopefully show this week in Athens was from these drawings that you made while in a residency in Iceland about 2 years ago. Again, they seem they're very kind of a different style altogether, but again with sort of these mysterious fragments of narrative going on in them. We'll take a look at them, but can you kind of describe what's happening? I love drawings like this. They seem sort of ancient, or they're depicting rituals or something kind of occulty about them. Very intriguing. What was going on while you're in Iceland to inspire you to draw this series?
These were created unintentionally. So I participated in a summer residency, as you said, a couple of years ago in this really super small fishing town in Skagastrand, just like 8 hours north of Reykjavik. And I had gone there with the intention of undertaking a specific project, this outdoor sound piece that involved quite a bit of tech equipment. So despite it being summer and kind of planning to go there at the height of what is considered warm, there was a lot of misty and cold days. So the amount of actual time I had to test pilot the sound piece outside and play around was really few and far between. So during my residency, I actually unintentionally spent a lot of my days inside the studio drawing. You know, usually the way I approach making work starts off with a conception or an idea that I kind of grow, and then I go forward and then approach the work, kind of this dance between conception and making. But very rarely do I take this dance where it's making, then hopefully conception. So this series was born out of approach that is very unfamiliar to me. Like I didn't even intend on drawing when I went there. Like, I didn't even bring any drawing paper with me. I just used scrap paper that was lying around in the shared studio space. So because I approached this work the other way around, I felt like I haven't found a way to interview these works that translates formally into words. But nonetheless, I know that these drawings were undoubtedly informed by my environment and what I was reading. So I was there midsummer. I was surrounded by, stark, bright light for almost 24 hours a day. So a lot of these drawings have quite a vast landscape. And living in a place where it's very casually, I get the sense it was like casually steeped in folklore. I think here when we read about folklore, it's like ooh ah, but there it seems so commonplace. And historically, Icelandic sagas are really just like in the landscape. Like, for example, like this rock face has a story, or this hill has another story, and that bend over there is XYZ. Like it's almost like they're taking the markings of a landscape so you remember where it is or what you are and attach a story to it and attach some kind of significance, which is so different than our experience here, right? Like, I can't go to, I mean, no, that's not true. Like, you could go to Guelph and every place is going to have its story, but maybe not every rock or every, turn or bend or creek or something specifically that we can share and agree on a story. Or it does, but it's not done in the same way. Like, so there's a combination of like magic and superstition and knowledge of stories attached to the landscape as being commonplace. And that's kind of how the drawings came to me. Like folklore there is so commonplace that, for example, I wanted to dig some holes outside for my that I was working on. And while I was working through the logistics for this project, through casual conversation, the coordinator there said to me, like, well, how big of a hole do you want to dig? And her concern was not so much about, physical hazards, while someone could potentially fall into the hole or hurt themselves, but it was really like disturbing the little people. But the way she phrased it was kind of in the same way that one would be concerned about falling into a hole. So that really struck me. So yeah, that's kind of a long way around of explaining these drawings.
Wow. Well, it's a lovely series, and they have that real sense, I think, of that mystery. Yeah, I think I've never been to Iceland. Well, I have briefly once at the airport, but I've always been interested in how seriously they do take their folklore. Like, maybe it's a cliche, but some Icelandic people actually believe in the elves and are like cautious when they go out into the mountains to encounter spirits or nymphs or whatever format that it is in the Icelandic culture. Incredible. Well, you live out in the land too. I've been at a invitation to visit you once at your residency where you live at. Well, you say it's Rockwood, but it's kind of it's in the middle of nowhere outside of Guelph. Beautiful farm where you live at, and you run something amazing out there called the Lore Residency. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how the idea came to be for you to set this up and how long you've been running this?
Yeah, so the idea came very casually. Wasn't born into itself right away, but I started organizing things around 2017 as just like a one-time gathering of artists to showcase their work, storytellers, some poetry, and then it really kind of snowballed from there. So the concept of lore is to bring together like arts and culture and the environment and apply nature as an architectural framework to establish community and this idea of intergenerational sharing of knowledge and cultural experience. Like through lore, through like verbal sharing of knowledge and information. So what we do is like we host community events that focus on oral traditions. So it could be music, storytelling, some workshops. And then, we also invite artists to germinate their own ideas and projects while exploring, I would say, casual farming and environmental stewardship, and then some aspect of their stay, uh, some aspect of community engagement. So I recently shifted art collaborators. So Laura is now in partnership between myself and Hallie Roback, who is currently based in Guelph.
Oh,
And
I had no idea Hallie was involved in this.
yeah,
She's very involved with that video recently too. Amazing.
yeah. So yeah. So her background, like me, kindred spirits, is also in sociology. But she also has a MFA in documentary media. So we have similar backgrounds where she's also inspired by the art of storytelling and how it applies in her documentary practice, which focus on social issues, the community, stories of local interests, and also like the natural world, yeah, around us. So yeah, we are, I would say, located in my home here in the Wellington County area, but we often collaborate with other members, businesses, and organizations, both in Guelph and other farms here to host events and artisan projects. So it's really quite flexible in terms of where the space is. And yeah, so Hallie and I started our conversation late last year, and we were intending on hosting a series of storytelling events this year. But like everyone else, we're shifting gears, and um, since the coronavirus, we're now in the kind of like the planning phases of doing an audio podcast or interview series of sorts, specifically on solitude, and through interviews gather multiple perspectives and insights on what can arise when we or other living things are alone, and what can only arise when we're alone. So just like going in from a micro perspective of a seed germinating, like, I don't know, when I think about a seed, like a lot of its time has to be by itself, and then to like a more macro perspective of an asteroid traveling alone in space. And so we're looking to interview farmers, scientists, physicists, sociologists, like a whole range, to see like the potency, potential, and the delights of solitude, especially when it's such like I don't know, a collective experience right now. Like storytelling is such a great way, and a really old way of connecting with each other, and making sense of the world around us. It's Yeah, this is a unique time right now where we are collectively experiencing more time physically with ourselves or with a smaller group of people. However, I had this conversation with my friend the other day, around dinner time, and I was thinking, like, cerebrally, I think we are reaching out more than ever. Either that's through social media, the internet, or Zoom, but almost like in lieu of physical contact, we are just like wanting to like just connect. And I think it's just our human nature and our need. Like it's almost a survival need to share our story, right? Because it's information sharing, and that kind of drives us to connect. So yeah, that's
Yeah, I've been thinking about that idea a lot, like doing the show and whatnot, and trying to figure out what makes sense right now, if anything. And of course, for those like fortunate enough not to be like frontline workers and have time to do things like this, but just trying to figure out what's like prudent to do, And I guess I've come to this. Personal realization is like it doesn't matter really, like it's all up to the individual, and it's sort of an unprecedented wild west sort of time of solitude like you're speaking of, but with this layer of the internet that can allow incredible things to take place. And I mean, I guess I wrestled in my mind, like, is it even worth doing this? Like, is it important to make new content or whatnot during this time when there's so much existing arts and cultural artifacts that people can look at. But a few weeks, last week, I had a guest, Dustin Seabrook, who's making a video series about people in isolation called Project Isolation. People send him videos that they just shoot on their phones, and there's one person in it who had ability issues. Like I believe she was kind of somewhat bedridden, and she thought everything that's going on is amazing in an accessibility way, that there's so much continual content for her to experience and
Yeah.
feel a connection with people.
Yeah.
So I mean, how would ideally, when this is all over, Fan-Ling, what would you like to sort of do with lore in the future, and maybe like how is this time maybe like altering maybe what you thought you wanted to do 6 months ago? Like, has it refocused the value
Yeah.
of it?
Yeah, it's such a great question because I think, like a lot of us, we won't go back to kind of like what we had necessarily planned. But I do know that kind of the importance of like engagement with something animated and living. I think there will be a thirst for that out there, and like the tactility of aliveness, I think, is something that I'm really drawn to. And I'm not the only one. Like not just like away from objects and things, I think the aliveness of animated life is, this sounds very broad, but I think that's where my breadcrumb trail of thought is headed for things such as lore, which is coming together and in some form or fashion or another, and sharing our stories. So
Well, I
yeah.
actually think maybe somewhat coincidentally, what you're doing out there and what I've gleaned as like the tone or the focus is has become, I think, like the most relevant form of art in this. I think people have learned to, step back, push the brakes a bit, and to sort of refocus on things that are really important, like personal relationships, storytelling, thinking about food, thinking about nature, thinking about like everyday objects, thinking, just about like things that are truly vital for life and existence and happiness. And I think you're on to something there, where I think there's going to be a refocusing from maybe things that are a little bit more, commercial or hipster, or about the trend of the minute, whatnot. I think the entire art world is refocusing onto themes that you've been exploring. What do you think? What have you been thinking about along those lines, as far as yourself, and potentially might what the contemporary art world might look like coming out of this? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the contemporary art world, it's really hard to say, but I think what a lot of people have observing, like what I've noticed, is this like amazing coming together of people and artists online, and this real generosity of spirit right now, which is quite lovely. Like, there's people creating living room showcases, free art festivals, artists, teaching free classes, and like a a real heightened sense of urgency to connect. And so whether or not this carries forward, it probably won't in the exact same way, but really only time will tell. Like, I think historically art often is a collective conversation with, what's happening around us, whether that's, politically, socially, environmentally. How the art world will change really depends on the types of conversations and actions as a collective that we're having. Yeah, in terms of like, I think you had asked about like what I've been thinking about, or like personally on my own.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any like, with more time to be in solitude, or to slow things down? Yeah, what have you been thinking about?
Yeah. Um, I started this. Yeah, I started this really light meditation practice last fall, and it was really like only once a week. And over the last 2 or so months, I've found this to really come to the forefront for me more than ever. And, I've been asking myself, why meditate? And I've been taking a lot of inspiration lately from, do you know Pema Chodron?
I can't say I do for sure. Or,
Yeah, I really like her. She's this great Buddhist nun. And anyway, so I've had this daily ritual in the mornings when I read little snippets from her, and she talks about, and I've been really gravitating towards it lately. So she talks about how meditation is not just a way to kind of feel good, and actually entering it with this mindset. You can set yourself up for failure because you have a set of expectations, and what's lovely about meditation is she just talks about how it takes us, just as we are and just the way things are. So it offers a very simple and direct relationship with the way we are, and I think that's really rich, especially right now. So that's kind of what I've been leaning to and investigating, and kind of, I touched on it briefly before when we were talking about lore, but helps me just to really take in my surroundings when I'm outside and just seeing just what it is, like the living and animated things that are around me, just the way they are, and yeah.
mm-hmm. And before we kind of end up this interview, I really want to get some of your thoughts about your the other hat you wear at the Guelph Arts Council. You worked there for maybe a year and a half or something, I think. And to tell us a little bit about your experience there, but also like, what is currently going on there, and maybe like if the Guelph Arts Council is like coming up with new ways of doing things or plans to address what's going on or in the future. How it's I've always been a little slightly jealous of the Guelph Arts Council because it predates Ed Video by a few months as Guelph's longest running, still existing arts organization. So you beat us, almost 45 years old, I think. So.
Organizations, yeah.
So what's your role there, and how's that going?
So yeah, I'm the co-manager of programs and operations at Guelph Arts Council. We're a small charity organization made up of 3 staff and a really excellent, dedicated group of volunteer committee members. So Patty Broughton is the executive director, and I share this role with my colleague Priyam Sengupta. So in my shared role, I directly oversee the programs and communications for the organization. And as a whole, Guelph Arts Council is like, we're here to support local artists and advocate for the arts, provide educational tools, and really to amplify and celebrate what artists in Guelph are doing right now. And most of that is online. So like other arts organizations, we're really utilizing kind of the internet and online platforms as tools to support artists. And most recently, yesterday, actually, we announced alongside the Downtown Guelph Business Association, we will be going forward with Art on the Street, however, virtually. So Art on the Street, as you know, is such a summer staple in our community. It's one of the largest outdoor exhibition and art sales event in Guelph. So we are happy that we can provide an alternative space to showcase artists and their artwork online, because I know a lot of them are creating right now. So for those of you who are listening or watching and are artists, Art on the Virtual Street is a juried application process that is open to artists within Guelph, Wellington County and surrounding areas right now until May 25th. There's no fee to take part, and applicants must have the ability to accept online payments, have an online presence, and offer kind of safe delivery or curbside pickup. So for those of us interested in applying, they can visit guelpharts.ca for more info or get in touch with myself.
Oh, that's awesome. I wasn't aware of that. I know it's such a huge undertaking, like to do it in the first place, but then to figure out pretty quickly how to, substitute that online. Congratulations to you and Patty and your whole team and all the artists involved for figuring that out. Hopefully, it's really challenging times, and I think in the next 6 months and a year from now will be even more challenging for a lot of artists and arts organizations. So anything you can do to kind of help out with that as the Guelph Arts Council, I think is uh, really, really commendable, and I'm sure the artists will be delighted to still be getting their work out there, and also you don't have to worry if it rains as well.
Yeah, exactly. No tent.
So lastly, I love to ask my guests. I mean, we touched on this, I guess, but about your thoughts. But the last question I like is like kind of although this is a global trauma, and a lot of people are sick and a lot of people have died and whatnot, and there's still a lot of big question marks kind of floating around as for some reason people are in this mood to sort of get back to normal before I think we really even know what we're dealing with here. When we sort of come through this slowly, what are you hoping that I guess humanity might learn or change about what we used to do in the old world?
The old world. Well, I think the pandemic highlights more than ever, the importance of community and community support, whatever shape or form that takes. It also really highlights a lot of the systematic challenges, structural and financial gaps our society faces that are more apparent right now in a time of crisis. So, in an immediate way, my hope, moving forward is for us to take this opportunity to unpack, acknowledge, and work towards a more equitable system.
So sorry, I was just trying to get Edie's attention. Sorry,
Shoot,
move on.
you got my attention.
Sorry.
No, it's all good.
Sorry, go on about that was a terrible time.
That was my thought. Yeah. It's like getting the basket in on the buzzer, like the ball in on the buzzer.
That was a 3 point lob. Yeah. Sorry, just please. Sorry, that was a terrible time. But can you just kind of complete that thought as I was listening about what your hopes are?
Yeah, just like looking into the future and in terms of like looking at those structural and financial gaps that our society faces, and how can we move forward from there, and really reflect on and looking at some of the holes that we have in our system in that way. So
Well, I hope so too. Fan-Ling, thanks so much for sharing all these ideas with us. It was great to hear more about your work that I've been very curious about, and especially about like sort of the underpinnings of how you're approaching it. I learned a lot today. It's too bad we're not eating souvlaki in the shadow of the Acropolis tonight, but the plan is to go back 1 year from now, if it's possible, with you and Corey, and we'll try to throw down and showcase our work, and meet a lot of people, and maybe think even a little differently about what we're doing. It's at least the plan, and we'll see how that proceeds. So thanks so much for your dedication to that idea, to that exhibition, and for doing what you do at the Lore Residency and with Guelph Arts Council as well.
thanks so much for having me, Scott.
Thanks, Fan-Ling. Take care, and I'll see you. I'll see you in real life again as soon as is possible.
Okay, sounds good.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. All right, that was a interview with Nearish by Guelph-based artist and residency coordinator and arts administrator Fan-Ling Suen, joining us today from her residency near Rockwood, Ontario, telling us all about her work and what she's up to and her hopes for the future as well. I hope everyone's enjoyed watching Open Circuit. Thanks to our live viewers. You can always see these episodes on Ed Video Guelph Archive in the future. Thanks to Edie for her video game review of the day, and for all of her dedication to this show. Please join us on Tuesday when we're back at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with amazing guest Andrew Mcluhan telling us about what he's doing to preserve the legacy of his grandfather Marshall Mcluhan and his father Eric Mcluhan, where he's based in Prince Edward County, Ontario. Thanks so much to Ed Video Board and staff for supporting this show, as well as to our viewers and to Ed Video's main funders, Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and the City of Guelph. All right, Edie, are you ready to play us out? It should be going. Thanks so much to Fan-Ling for joining us today and telling us about what she's been up to. All right, here we go. Have a great weekend, everybody.